The first one I wanted to talk about is the term microaggression. And I have been loving the work of Dr. Daryl Sue. He's done a lot of writing on that, using that term. And there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it and that I haven't used. I just kind of talk about in general what it is, daily indignities. And then I learned maybe within a year or two ago that Dr. Charles Pierce was in 1970 is credited for actually coining the term microaggressions. And so I like to talk about both of them as two men of color and honoring their work. And I was in a workshop in the last couple of weeks, large group. It was a city, and I was introducing microaggression and talking about how the word micro, the intent of that is about it's at the interpersonal level, and it's not supposed to mean small or not important. Micro and macroaggressions. Two people shot their hand up. They both were younger women of color. When younger women of color speak, I listen very closely because often folk are more up on issues or more, I'm just in my 60s. And so when younger folks across racialized identity, but particularly women of color. And they were like, yeah, we get that. And the reality is people don't know that, and particularly whites. And so when we're talking about microaggressions around race, it feels like you're just playing into white fragility to make whites comfortable instead of calling them racist aggressions. 15, 20 minutes later, as this group, very cross-racial group, top leaders of a city, and then city managers and administrators, really engaged. And we had more and more, particularly folk of color, say, yeah, it's been a trigger for me. I hate the term because what I find is whites basically use it to dismiss and say it's not that big a deal. It's just a microaggression. So misusing the concept, the term, in order to perpetuate keeping racism in place. By the way, I do this one hand here, one hand here. It's privileged, marginalized. So whites here, folk of color here. So I've heard this feedback before and taken it in. So I actually said, so daily aggressions, daily indignities, they're like, yeah, no, it's not clear enough. We need to call them racist aggressions. I was like, great. And many organizations aren't ready for that. And the pushback will be such resistance. And they said, well, we can call it interpersonal aggressions. So they didn't resolve, but I was delighted. One of the top white leaders said, I'm really hearing this and I want to continue this conversation because do not want this term to be actually another aggression. So over lunch, I redid my PowerPoint. And at the end of the day, actually, these same women of color came up to talk and engage. And they said, we were deeply impacted that you so quickly changed your language. I said, I'm trying it out. So that's been 2 or 3 weeks. I've changed handouts since then. I'm telling people what I'm doing. So I'm not locked in. I want to honor the work of the men of color and also honor the younger folk of color, cross-gender identities and sex of birth who were speaking in that meeting. And so I just want to offer that to you all, that whether you keep the term, but talk more about the possible misuse of it to help people in privileged identities feel better and not feel, as opposed to these are interpersonal aggressions. So that's the term I'm using, interpersonal aggressions. I'm just naming it as that. And then I talk about systemic oppression and then group level cultural dynamics that are also perpetuating privilege and marginalization. I also know that this language won't work in some organizations, that even microaggressions may be too much. And, I just turned 63. So I'm getting clearer that I just show up as I show up and clear and direct. Someone literally on a call just now said, I'm kind of more like you, assertive and aggressive. And I was like, that's a wonderful compliment in that I'm naming dynamics as a white person. So I wanted to start with that, why I'm using the term interpersonal aggression.